There is a kind of pain people rarely talk about because it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. It doesn't scream. It doesn't collapse. It simply lives inside you, quiet, heavy, and patient. It is the pain of carrying a story you were never allowed to tell. And the longer it stays buried, the more it shapes your breath, your silence, and the way you move through the world. This is not weakness. This is what happens when truth has nowhere to go. There is no greater agony than carrying a story inside you, and most people never realize how heavy that weight becomes until it starts shaping the way they breathe, speak, and exist. Stories unspoken do not stay quiet. They press against the chest. They sit behind the eyes. They turn ordinary silence into something sharp and restless. This is not just emotional discomfort. It is a form of inner confinement. When a story is buried, it doesn't disappear. It waits. From the outside, a person carrying an unspoken story can look composed, functional, even successful. But inside, there is constant tension between what is lived and what is hidden. Every smile costs effort. Every conversation feels incomplete. The voice learns restraint, but the soul grows louder. Agony begins when truth has nowhere to go. The pain of a hidden story is not always dramatic. Often it is quiet and persistent. It shows up as fatigue without explanation, sadness without a clear cause, or anger that feels out of proportion. These are not random emotions, they are signals. The body and spirit reacting to the pressure of containment. Silence becomes dangerous when it is forced. When you silence yourself to be accepted, to keep peace, or to avoid discomfort, the cost is internal fracture. You begin to split, one version that survives publicly and another that exists privately, unseen and unheard. The longer this division lasts, the heavier the agony becomes. Unspoken stories distort identity. When you cannot tell the truth of who you are, what you've endured, or what you've learned, you begin to forget yourself. You speak around your life instead of from it. You edit your experiences. You soften your pain. And slowly, you lose access to your own depth. There is a particular grief in knowing your story could heal, warn, or free someone, but keeping it locked away out of fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood. This grief compounds because it is not only about you, it is about the impact you withhold from the world. The agony intensifies when you sense that your silence is not protecting you anymore, it is imprisoning you. What once felt like safety begins to feel like erasure. You realize that peace bought through silence is temporary, but the damage done by self-denial is cumulative. Many people mistake endurance for strength. They believe surviving quietly is noble. But carrying an untold story for too long does not make you strong, it makes you tired. Strength is not the ability to suffer silently. It is the courage to speak when silence is no longer sustainable. There is also shame wrapped around untold stories. Shame convinces you that your experiences are too much, too messy, or too insignificant to matter. It tells you your voice is a burden, but the truth is, the burden is not the story. It is the silence surrounding it. The moment you recognize the weight of what you've been carrying is the moment awareness begins to break the cycle. Awareness doesn't demand immediate speech. It asks for honesty with yourself first. It asks you to admit, quietly if needed, that something inside you has been waiting to be heard. Every untold story wants resolution, not exposure. It wants meaning, not attention. And when stories remain trapped, they do not fade, they leak. They show up in choices, in relationships, in patterns that repeat until truth is allowed to surface. The body remembers what the mouth refuses to say. Tight shoulders, shallow breath, restless sleep, these are not coincidences. They are the physical language of a story asking for release. There is no greater agony than knowing your truth could set you free and choosing silence instead. Not because silence is wrong, but because prolonged silence turns into self-abandonment. And here is the quiet truth most people never hear. Your story does not demand to be told loudly. It demands to be told truthfully, even if only to yourself at first. Most people do not choose silence freely, and they learn it. They absorb it slowly, often before they have language for what they're losing. Silence is taught through reaction. Through the moment a truth is met with discomfort, dismissal, or punishment. A child speaks honestly and is told to calm down. A feeling is expressed and labeled as too much. A question is asked and met with avoidance. These moments seem small, but they leave lasting instructions. Some parts of you are not welcome. Silencing begins when expression threatens belonging. Humans are wired for connection, and when honesty risks that connection, the instinct to protect attachment overrides the instinct to speak. The voice retreats not because it is weak, but because it is adaptive. Silence becomes a survival strategy. Over time, this strategy hardens into identity. You become the one who listens instead of speaks, the one who understands instead of explains, the one who holds everything together while holding everything in. What began as protection slowly becomes confinement. Many people learn silence through inconsistency. One day, truth is welcomed, the next, it is punished. This unpredictability trains hyper-awareness. You start scanning for reactions before speaking. You edit yourself in real time. You learn to read the room better than you read yourself. Cultural expectations reinforce this conditioning. Some are taught to be polite rather than honest, strong rather than expressive, grateful rather than truthful. Silence becomes mistaken for maturity and endurance for virtue. Pain deepens when silence is rewarded, when you are praised for not complaining, admired for resilience, trusted because you never make things uncomfortable. These rewards teach you that your worth is tied to how little space you take up. Another layer forms when your truth challenges authority, tradition, or expectations. Speaking becomes dangerous not because the truth is wrong, but because it disrupts narratives others depend on. Silence keeps harmony, but only externally. Over time, you internalize the censor. You don't need to be told to stay quiet anymore. You do it automatically. Thoughts stop halfway. Emotions flatten before surfacing. The inner voice lowers its volume. This is how people lose access to their own stories, not suddenly, but gradually. Memory dulls, language thins, the story remains, but the ability to articulate it weakens. Silence also grows from comparison. When you're told others have it worse, when your pain is minimized by perspective, you learn that suffering must reach a certain threshold to be valid. Until then, it stays hidden. Eventually, silence feels safer than speech, even when it hurts. Speaking feels risky. Silence feels familiar. Pain becomes preferable to uncertain relief. The tragedy is that silence does not prevent pain, it relocates it. What is not spoken becomes embodied. What is not processed becomes pattern. What is not expressed becomes behavior. Many people spend years believing they are calm, patient, or low maintenance, when in truth they are simply unheard, even by themselves. The first crack in this conditioning appears when silence stops working, when holding everything in no longer brings peace, when the cost outweighs the protection. That moment is not failure, it is awakening. When a story stays buried for too long, it doesn't remain still, it changes form. What could have been spoken as truth turns into tension. What could have been expressed as grief becomes irritability. What could have been released as pain hardens into numbness. The story adapts to survival, but the cost is internal erosion. Unspoken stories often show up as emotional confusion. You feel deeply, but you can't always explain why. Sadness arrives without a clear source. Anger appears suddenly and leaves guilt behind. These emotions are not random, they are fragments of a narrative trying to surface without words. Over time, buried stories affect how you relate to others. You may struggle to be fully present because part of you is always holding something back. Conversations feel shallow even when they're meaningful. Connection feels incomplete even when it's real. You are there, but not entirely. There is also a subtle loneliness that forms. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being unseen. You may be surrounded by people, yet feel fundamentally unknown. This loneliness cuts deeper because it exists even in closeness. Identity begins to blur when stories remain untold. You forget which parts of you are authentic and which are adaptations. You become skilled at performing versions of yourself that fit expectations, but disconnected from the one that holds truth. Over time, you ask yourself who you are without the silence, and you don't always know the answer. Buried stories often surface in patterns, repeated relationships, familiar disappointments, cycles that feel inevitable. The story, denied language, seeks repetition instead. It tries to be recognized through experience. Another consequence is emotional exhaustion. Carrying a story requires constant effort. Monitoring speech, managing reactions, containing memory. This invisible labor drains energy in ways rest cannot fix. Many people with buried stories become caretakers of others' emotions. It's easier to tend to external needs than confront internal truth. You become skilled at empathy while neglecting your own voice. Creativity often suffers. Expression feels blocked, words feel distant. Inspiration stalls. This is not lack of talent, it is self-censorship at work. There is also fear attached to the story. Fear that speaking will reopen wounds. Fear that words will change everything. Fear that once spoken, the story cannot be taken back. Silence feels like control. But silence does not heal wounds, it preserves them. Healing requires movement, and movement requires expression. The body continues to carry what the voice avoids: tightness, fatigue, restlessness. These are not weaknesses, they are signals. Eventually, the story demands attention, not through drama, but through pressure. The longer it waits, the heavier it becomes. This is the turning point many people reach, the realization that silence is no longer neutral. It is active harm. Telling the truth is rarely frightening because of the words themselves. It is frightening because of the imagined consequences. People fear not the act of speaking, but the reaction that might follow. They fear rejection, disbelief, dismissal, or silence in return. Once a story has been carried alone for a long time, the idea of offering it to the world feels like exposure without protection. One of the deepest fears is losing belonging. Many people stay silent because their story doesn't fit the roles they are expected to play. The strong one, the grateful one, the stable one. Speaking threatens these identities, and with them the sense of safety that comes from being needed or accepted. There is also fear of disruption. Truth changes dynamics, it reorders relationships, it challenges unspoken agreements. People worry that once the story is told, things will never return to how they were, and they're right. But what often goes unexamined is whether how things were was ever sustainable. Another fear is being misunderstood. Stories are layered, complex, and emotional. There is a risk that others will hear only part of it, that they will oversimplify, judge, or respond with solutions instead of understanding. For someone who has carried their truth carefully, this feels like mishandling something sacred. Many people fear becoming a burden. They've learned that their pain makes others uncomfortable. That honesty creates awkwardness. That silence keeps things smooth. Speaking feels like asking others to carry weight they didn't sign up for. There is also fear of permanence. Once spoken, the story exists outside the self. It can't be edited in private anymore. Silence allows for control. Words feel final. Another hidden fear is grief. Speaking the story often means acknowledging what was lost: time, safety, innocence, opportunity. Silence delays mourning, expression brings it forward. Some fear their story will change how they see themselves, that naming pain will make it real, that giving it language will strip away denial. This fear is not weakness, it is self-preservation, trying to hold the last barrier. There is also fear of responsibility. Once truth is spoken, change becomes possible, and change requires action. Silence allows stagnation without accountability. For many, speaking also challenges loyalty to family, to history, to versions of people they still love. Telling the truth
can feel like betrayal, even when it is not. All these fears combine into one quiet conclusion. It is safer to carry this alone. And for a while that may feel true, but safety built on self-erasure eventually collapses. The moment someone considers telling their story, the inner world shifts, anxiety rises, resistance appears, doubt speaks loudly. This is not intuition saying, don't. It is conditioning saying, stay familiar. What often surprises people is that the fear does not disappear before speaking. Courage does not arrive as confidence. It arrives as willingness to proceed despite uncertainty. Expression does not begin with an audience. It begins with permission. The moment you allow yourself to acknowledge the truth, without editing, without justification, something loosens inside. The story, once compressed, finally has room to breathe. Relief may not arrive immediately, but pressure begins to ease. Often the first expression is private, a sentence written and erased, a thought spoken aloud when no one is listening, a realization admitted internally. These moments may feel small, but they are foundational. They signal a shift from suppression to honesty. When a story is expressed, even quietly, the body responds. Breath deepens, shoulders drop, sleep softens. These are not imagined effects. They are the nervous system recognizing safety where there was once vigilance. Expression also restores coherence. The scattered emotions begin to align. Confusion starts to organize itself into meaning. What once felt overwhelming becomes understandable. Language brings structure to experience. Another subtle change is self-compassion. When you finally hear your own story, you begin to relate to yourself differently. Harsh judgment softens. Blame loses its grip. You stop asking why you weren't stronger and start recognizing how much you survived. Telling the story, internally or externally, also interrupts repetition. Patterns lose power when they are named. Awareness breaks cycles that silence sustained. Expression reconnects you to your identity. You remember who you were before silence. You recognize values that were buried alongside the story. This reconnection brings grounding. There is often grief alongside relief. Grief for the years spent carrying alone. Grief for the version of yourself that endured quietly. This grief is not regression. It is integration. Expression does not demand disclosure to everyone. Discernment matters. Safety matters. Truth does not need to be public to be real. As expression continues, confidence grows, not the loud kind, but the steady kind. You trust yourself more because you are no longer hiding from yourself. Relationships begin to shift. Some deepen, some fade. This is not loss. It is alignment responding to truth. Most importantly, expression restores agency. You are no longer just the carrier of a story. You are its narrator. Carrying your story forward does not mean living inside it. It means integrating it into who you are without allowing it to become the only lens through which you see yourself. The story becomes part of your foundation, not your ceiling. Wisdom begins when you stop telling your story to relive the pain and start telling it to understand the meaning. This shift is subtle but powerful. You no longer speak from the wound, you speak from awareness. Boundaries become essential at this stage. Not everyone is entitled to your truth. Discernment protects what expression has opened. Sharing becomes intentional, not impulsive. Your story gains purpose when it informs your choices rather than controls them. You recognize patterns earlier. You listen to intuition faster. You walk away sooner. The story sharpens perception instead of reopening injury. There is strength in knowing when silence is no longer suppression, but sovereignty. You are no longer quiet because you are afraid. You are quiet because you are whole. Your past no longer demands explanation. It informs your compassion, your patience, your depth, but it does not dictate your future. Over time, the story integrates so fully that it stops feeling like a separate burden. It becomes knowledge carried lightly. You realize that telling your story was never about exposure. It was about reclaiming ownership. The agony named was never meant to last forever. It was meant to move you toward truth. When the story is honored, it no longer aches. It rests. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you, but there is also no greater liberation than finally letting it live in the open air of your own truth.